Great. Thank you. Thanks, Jonathan, and Kristen from the Center for Next Generation Photovoltaics for having me today. I'm excited to share a little bit about the solar market here in Texas with you all. Looks like we've got a good group, and do feel free to send me some questions via chat, and I'll get to those after a bit. I'll spend a few minutes walking through some high-level pieces, and then we'll get into some Q&A. Really excited to be here and talk about the solar industry. Just for a bit of background for you all, Texas Solar Power Association is a statewide trade association for the solar industry here in Texas. We cover both wholesale and retail markets, so our membership covers large-scale solar developers, manufacturers, all the way down to construction and distribution of materials and residential and commercial integration. So kind of the full supply chain of companies doing work in every segment, which is exciting. I think one of the logos dropped off my logo graph there. Eon Climate and Renewables is also a member of the group, so don't want them to be left out. Just a quick outline of what I was going to cover today. I wanted to start with a couple of national trends, big picture things going on in the U.S. to put solar in context, and then really spend most of the time talking about Texas in particular, starting with kind of the foundational pieces of why the industry's here and what it is about Texas that makes it interesting for solar and vice versa. Then get into where we are as a market here in Texas in 2016 and some of the things that have happened over the past year, 2 years that have given us a lot of excitement about where things are headed. And then finally do a little bit of a look ahead on projections going forward, what's coming down the development pipeline, and where we see things going over the next several years. So hopefully a comprehensive picture, and again, jump in with questions and I'll try to cover those. So before I get into the specific market pieces, I always like to start with a reminder that solar exists at all scales. So when you think about solar power, sometimes people just think one or the other. They might just have residential rooftop applications in mind or power plants. It's really all of the above. Solar is an inherently modular technology, with the solar module being the primary electrical generating component, and so those can be on a residential rooftop, on a commercial or industrial rooftop, and at large power plant scale out in bigger areas. And then kind of in the middle, community solar, a new application that's jumping up that's kind of a hybrid between retail and wholesale level power. So each of those is a market segment for solar. So when you think about the portfolio that you have for electricity generation, the solar component of that portfolio can itself be a portfolio. There's several different pieces to it, and there are solar companies active in each of those spaces. So kind of where we are right now nationally, through the first quarter of this year, we surpassed 27 gigawatts of total installed capacity in the U.S., and just this quarter passed an interesting milestone for the industry. We passed 1 million individual solar installations. So we really hit a significant milestone in terms of our growth, in terms of our impact. Last year we did over 7 gigawatts in the country, which is our largest year ever, and really every year is our largest year ever. Seeing another 14 gigawatts planned to come online for this year, another big growth. And employment-wise, we're up over 200,000 employees in the solar industry, which is, again, a significant growth over the past year and a huge, more than 100% growth in the past 6. And to put that in kind of graphical form, this is showing kind of year-over-year installations over the past 15 years. As you can see, in the last 4 or 5, a really significant uptick, now getting up into 6, 7 gigawatts per year. One interesting thing to me about our development, if you look at the graph, it took us until about 2008, 2009 to hit 1 gigawatt of total cumulative installed capacity. And now we do that amount in the U.S. in less than 3 months. So every 2 or so months, we're doing as much solar as we did cumulatively up until about 2009. So that kind of gives you a sense of how quickly things are moving nationally. And one of the distinctions, or one of the interesting things that's come about, is we're now a bigger part of new additions in general. So putting that 7 gigawatts in context, in 2015, that was about 30% of new electric capacity additions in the past year. So this is showing what solar, natural gas, coal, wind, and others contributed to total new additions. You can see we went from kind of single-digit percentages in the early 2010s to about 30% over the last few, which is now a significant part of the portfolio. We're not dominating, but it's a meaningful contribution. In the past quarter, in particular, we actually were a very significant contribution, 64%, which I think is more owing to the fact that solar, being modular and growing at residential, commercial, power plant scale, we're always growing. We're always adding new capacity, whereas if you just look at large traditional power plants like gas, coal, nuclear, they come on in very large chunks. So in any given quarter, you might not actually have any gas come online. Over the course of a year, you'll have a significant amount. So I don't expect that 64% to last for the entire year, but it's interesting to show that just on any given time window, you're going to see some solar additions. One of the reasons for that national level growth is has been over the past multiple years things that states have done to intentionally drive solar through renewable portfolio standards. What's interesting to me is that we've really crossed a threshold nationally where that's now no longer the main driver, the sole driver. The reason that utilities are bringing on solar into their portfolios is not solely because the states are making them do it. More than half of the 2016 capacity that we expect to come online is going to be driven by non-RPS means. It's going to be because utilities saw the economic value and chose to bring solar into the portfolio or for other reasons. So it's a real milestone for the industry. People can sometimes think that solar only happens by government mandate, but it's just not true. Nationally, certainly not here in Texas, which I'll get into, but even nationally, it's no longer the driving factor. So that's an exciting milestone for us. And why is that? What's driving that distinction? The costs have come down so far. So this is really the biggest story over the past 5 years with solar, is that the cost of generating electricity from solar has fallen 82% since 2009. Just a tremendous drop-off in what it costs to generate solar electricity. And there's really a lot of things that go into this. It's manufacturing improvements, it's technology improvements, it's scale up, going from a couple of 100 megawatts a year up to the 7 gigawatts a year that I showed before. When you get to that scale, things get cheaper. You're able to do things more efficiently. We have new financing improvements and installation methods and customer acquisition methods. There's really innovation across the full chain that have led to that price drop. And really, those price drops are sustainable. They are really baked in, and you'll continue to see price drops over time. Probably not quite that steep. 82% is kind of a historically big price drop, but we're going to continue to see those kinds of improvements in manufacturing, installation, and other aspects. So that's a huge part of why we are where we are. And I think one signal of how that's had an impact is you look at who's now getting involved in solar. Now that solar has become cost competitive, you're seeing very mainstream companies start to get into it and use solar for their own needs, for their own purposes. And this is interesting to me because the top corporate leaders in solar are very much mainstream companies like Walmart, like Target, Costco, and others that aren't doing it out of the goodness of their heart because they think that it's necessarily good for the planet, though some may do. I think these are companies that look at their bottom lines. These are companies that pay very close attention to their energy use and their energy costs, and they see that solar is now in a cost competitive place where they can make a good investment in solar that will help them save money on their bills and hedge out for a number of years. So that's exciting. One interesting thing that's developed on the corporate side is that not every corporate investment in solar is necessarily on the roof. So sometimes a facility doesn't have the space to host as much solar on site as they would like to. So we're starting to see contracts that corporations have with solar companies to provide them with a lot from the output from a solar plant that's off-site somewhere where they can have more room to generate. So we'll start to see that more and more. Here in Texas, I didn't have time to do a slide. Just the past week, Toyota announced a 7 megawatt installation on their new North American headquarters in Dallas, in North Dallas and Plano. So another kind of mainstream corporation that's saying, solar can be a part of our electricity mix. All right, let's get into Texas in particular. So I'm not going to make the pitch for why solar is the greatest thing ever. The story here is that Texas has a number of characteristics that make it a particularly good fit for solar, and solar has a number of characteristics that make it a particularly good fit for Texas and valuable for Texas. Obviously, we've become very cost competitive. Texas has just a tremendous amount of land and sun and energy demand and people, and it's growing. So there's just a lot of reasons why solar makes a lot of sense here. I wanted to break that down into things that make more sense from an individual buyer perspective, and really this is why the industry is here, and that's kind of what's important. It's not the state driving it. These are customers driving solar. So at the residential level and commercial level, retail side, you're giving customers the first opportunity to really self-generate for themselves, to make investments themselves in power generation and earn the economic return off of that just like others have. In terms of their own finances, it gives you a chance to control your utility bill out to the future. You know exactly what the electricity from that solar plant is going to cost because you've made that capital investment all up front. And technically, it gives you a chance to kind of site generation exactly where it's needed on the lines and reduce line losses and that sort of thing. At the wholesale level, the power plant level, you're getting there the cheapest possible solar electricity. So when you can use a lot of space, put a very large plant together, you can get very, very cost competitive peak power. And compared to some other resources, you can deploy solar very quickly at any scale, meeting any kind of load need. And so that's one of the reasons why it's interesting to folks. And particularly here in Texas where we have a lot of wind, and I personally love wind, I think it's great, but some people are concerned about the fact that you can see it for miles. Solar sits very low to the ground, and so you're not going to see it on the landscape very much unless you're right up close. So that, for some folks, is interesting. I like to dig into a couple of those points just because I think they're interesting. Number one, we have a tremendous amount of solar potential. I just can't ever say it enough. Texas has more solar resource than any other state. We have the ability to generate more solar electricity than any other state because of two things. Number one, we have very good sun. This is a solar insolation map from NREL that shows kind of the intensity of the solar resource. The darker, the better. And certainly as you get out into West Texas, you're starting to get into some of the best solar resource we have in the country. And not only do we have good intensity of the resource, but we just have a tremendous amount of land. So there's no other state that has the combination of intensity and size that we do. So we're going to be able to generate just a tremendous amount of solar electricity, and that's a resource that we can take advantage of. Another reason why solars make some sense here in Texas in particular is that a lot of our load needs are inherently driven by the weather. They're driven by the sun. This is a chart that shows what the composition of our peak load is at two different times. One, a mild day in March, where in ERCOT last year, we used about 33 megawatts, 33 gigawatts, 33,000 megawatts of, had that much energy demand, where the residential component was about 26%. And then you look at a very hot day at really system peak demand, 69,000 megawatts, 69 gigawatts. And what changed in that? The biggest change is that the residential wedge increased significantly, and why is that? It's air conditioning. All people going home, turn on their air conditioners because they got to stay cool when it's 107 degrees out and blazing. So you've got this natural synergy between the reason why our peak loads are so high is because the sun is out making people hot. So it makes some sense to utilize that resource for solar electricity. You know it's going to be there. All right, now let's look at where we are in terms of actual market development here in the state. We're at about 560 megawatts through the first quarter of 2016, the first 3 months of this year. We're running about 10th compared to other in the rankings with states. About 9th added in 2015, running about 10th cumulatively. We're behind some of the other big sunny states like California and Arizona, but we're also behind some of the smaller, less sunny states like Massachusetts and New Jersey. Part of that is because Those states have higher electricity prices than we do, so it's just an economic reason that makes some sense there. But the other reason, like I mentioned before with some of the state mandates, other states have had intentional solar policy to drive the industry forward. They've said, we want this amount of solar to be generated, and so the industry has responded. We haven't had that in the state of Texas. There's been no particular solar policy to drive us forward, but we're starting to come to scale just based on the customer and market drivers that exist, and I'll get into some of those really to meet the needs that I just talked about at the wholesale and retail levels. The fundamental value proposition of solar economically is now making sense for a wide range of customers, so we're growing. So we're behind some of the other states, but that's not going to last long. We're going to move up this chart very quickly in the next year and certainly the next 3 years. So putting solar in context with where we are here in Texas with other generation sources, you may have a hard time finding us here on this pie chart. It's because we're in the other wedge. We are still in the less than 1% wedge here with hydro, biomass, and other, which is fine. That's just where we are right now at less than 1% by either generation capacity or energy generated. But we're going to move out of this quickly, and I always joke that my first goal for solar in Texas is to get out of the other wedge. We're ready to have our own wedge of the pie and be a contributor to the portfolio commensurate with the economics that we now offer. And then I always like to show some photos. So, you know, even though we're less than 1% of the total, we still have a market that's underway, 560 megawatts on the ground right now at all scales, from residential on a rooftop, at the neighborhood scale, a lot of rooftops starting to deploy, at the commercial scale, putting it on a range of commercial and industrial rooftops where it makes some sense. A lot of flat rooftop space here in Texas. If you've ever flown over, it turns out we have 270 square miles of rooftop space here in the state of Texas. A lot of room to put some solar on, and you can put it right where it's needed. Carports, interesting new segment, kind of a commercial application where you have some room and frankly in the hot Texas summers an interest in shading people's cars from all that sun, and you might as well do something with that. If you're going to block the sun, you might as well use it to generate electricity. And then at power plant scales, kind of in the 10 to 40 megawatt scale range, really starting to see bigger plants come online across the state, driven largely by Austin and San Antonio's efforts, but more coming, and I'll get into some of that. So really bigger plants coming online, taking advantage of our extensive sunshine and land area. So all of those market development activities kind of leading to a significant amount of job creation here in Texas, and we're now up over 7,000 jobs through 2015 across the state, acknowledged by the Wall Street Journal as something that's significant. One of the things that was particularly interesting to me in the last data collection on that was that 7,000 number is for full-time jobs, or mostly full-time jobs, people who are truly solar employees. What they also counted was that there's also 3,900 workers who are spending up to half of their time on solar. So not everybody is necessarily a full-time solar person. You may be in a construction firm, an engineering firm, you may be a product manufacturer, you may be a consultant, and now you're starting to add solar to your portfolio. You'll do one solar project, you'll get one solar client, you'll develop one solar product, like an electrical product, and that's economic development. That's great. That's growth for everybody. So our job growth impact won't necessarily be that now you've got a whole solar person from nothing. You're going to start giving employment opportunity and economic opportunity to existing industries, which is where a lot of our value will come from. And that's what the article from the Wall Street Journal was getting at. West Texas, a lot of the large solar power plants that are coming under construction are turning to the oil industry for those workers, the people who have the skills in getting in the field, driving piles, moving material. It's very transferable skills that people need when you're building some of those large solar plants. And it's not an all or nothing proposition. It's not like once you go solar, you can't ever go back. A lot of those workers are going to turn around and build oil projects later. It's fine. It's an additional set of skills that the solar industry can offer to those workers to now make them more employable in whatever sector they choose to work in. So I think it's a good opportunity across the board and part of solar's value here in Texas. Dipping into the market specifically where we are, on the retail side, like I mentioned, residential and commercial, we've got about 86 megawatts on the residential side, 65 on the non-residential commercial industrial rooftop size. That's happened largely so far through managed programs here in the Austin area through Austin Energy, CPS Energy, and San Antonio, and programs that the transmission and distribution utilities such as Encore in the Dallas area have led, along with municipal and co-op utilities all across the state that have intentionally had some support efforts to help their customers go solar. That's been a large part of the retail activity that's happened so far, and we'll see that continue. What is also interesting, and I'll get into a little bit, there's an even bigger part of the state, which is the competitive market, the competitive choice area. So I have a group of slides I didn't include here that just show the breakdown. About 75% of the load in Texas is actually in competitive retail choice areas where you, as a residence or a business, get to choose your electricity provider, as opposed to the municipal and co-op territory that are publicly owned where you have one provider for a certain territory. So solar is starting to get into those competitive markets where it's not just a single utility that serves an area, it's any number of retail providers that could serve that area, and I'll get into some of the innovation there. And then off-grid special applications, there's going to continue to be solar on road signs, on deer feeders, on gates, solar being inherently modular and inherently scalable. You'll see solar in all sorts of different places, but rooftop, on the retail side, rooftop and smaller ground mounts around a building will continue to be kind of the bigger parts of the market. So looking kind of quarter by quarter, we're going in the right direction since 2013, definitely scaling up and down a little bit just as the markets evolve, but certainly trending in the right direction. Had our best quarter ever in the first quarter of 2016. In the residential side, more than double our best quarter ever. So it was a really exciting growth. I mentioned the growth in the competitive choice area. I think that's a piece of it. Austin and San Antonio and the Dallas area continue to be good, strong markets and growing from there. So definitely trending in the right direction on residential and commercial. And I wanted to share some of the innovations that are happening in that competitive choice area that I mentioned. So by policy, folks that follow solar stuff may know that some states have what's called net energy metering, where utilities are required to buy back your generation. If you're a residential or commercial customer that has solar on the roof, they are required to buy back your excess generation, usually at the retail rate that they sold it to you. Texas doesn't have that policy. So in Texas, utilities, retail providers are not required to buy back your excess generation at all, let alone at any particular rate. But what's exciting is that competitively, retail providers are now starting to offer plans that do credit customer generation, many right about at the retail rate. So essentially providing, private market net metering. Just because those companies like TXU, like Green Mountain, like MP2 Energy see the value in solar electricity, not just their own portfolios that they can then have as a part of what they procure to meet other customer demand, but also because if I'm a retail provider, I want to recruit customers. I'm trying to get people to buy their electricity from me, and I know that if I am friendly to solar customers, they are more likely to sign with me as opposed to somebody else. And I think this will be an important factor over the next several years as more solar customers are out there. They're going to want to sign on with a retail provider and buy electricity from someone who's friendly to them on the solar side of it. And I think it's a win-win. The retail provider gets to hold on to a customer, and the solar customer gets a good arrangement with their provider. So I'm really excited about this. By policy, our association isn't driving for a one-state approach on metering. We think that there's plenty of market incentive for the players out there to do this of their own volition, and I think that will continue. All right, looking at the wholesale side, power plants. I showed some of the photos before. We've got about 400 megawatts of plants online through the first quarter of this year, most of them in that kind of 10 to 40 megawatt range that I mentioned. What's exciting is we're about to enter kind of the next phase, the next level, and there's a number of projects under construction now and under contract now, mostly in West Texas, where the big land and the big sun resides, that are kind of an order of magnitude higher, 100 plus megawatts, up to 170, closer to 200 megawatts of power production. So we're going to see a lot more come online later this year, which is great, and it'll be at a scale that we haven't seen yet here in Texas. Hopefully more photos coming that are good. So with that, I wanted to run through just a couple of the things that have happened over the past 18 months, 24 months that I think signal some of those step changes that we're seeing in the industry and moving forward why we're excited. Another article from the Wall Street Journal, I like to cite them because they are certainly pro-business and certainly not inherently supportive of solar for any other reason other than economic development. So when they say that the next Texas energy boom is solar, that's something. And what's interesting to me in this article that they wrote a couple of months ago, there's no question mark there. It wasn't a questioning whether or not solar is the next Texas energy boom. They was just saying it because the investment that we're seeing in those West Texas projects at the 100 megawatt plus scale is happening. One of those projects, a little smaller, a little earlier, this is about 2 years old now, but still very an important signifier for solar. So First Solar opened up the Berea solar plant in 2014. It started about 22 megawatts, now 30 megawatts. Why this was a milestone was that most power plants of any type look to have a contract for their electricity generation. You want to kind of know who's going to buy your product before you get financing to build it. And for solar, every large solar plant that had ever been built had what's called an offtake agreement, a power purchase agreement, where a utility or a counterparty agreed to buy the output for a certain number of years so that the solar company could go to a bank or someone else and get financing necessary to build the plant. First Solar built the first ever plant not to need to do that. They chose to build the plant of their own volition, self-financed or through their other means, without having a guaranteed offtake for the power production. So they chose to just say, we're going to sell this electricity into the ERCOT market, and we think that's going to be a moneymaker. We think we can do that economically without a guaranteed contract for the output. So that was the first one of those in the whole country. Turned a lot of heads, very exciting, kind of owing to solar's cost competitiveness and the attractiveness of Texas as a market, and West Texas in particular. Following closely on the heels of that, Austin Energy released a contract for a large amount of solar, and they partnered with Recurrent Energy, a large solar developer. And the reason this was a head turner was that it was the cheapest deal that anybody had seen in the United States, reported at the time at being about 5 cents a kilowatt hour or $50 a megawatt hour, which at the time, 2 years ago, definitely the best that anybody had seen, and really made folks stand up and look at Texas as a market and solar in general as a mature, cost-competitive technology. One of the interesting things on this was that Austin acknowledged that solar was competitive, and they also procured more than they originally thought. The original RFP was only for 50 megawatts, but the pricing that they got was so good they decided to triple that amount, and they took 150 megawatts, kind of the good deal when they saw it. So that turned a lot of heads and was pretty exciting. Subsequent procurements that came out, Luminant came out with a deal a couple months ago for 116 megawatts of solar that they were going to add to their portfolio. This is another merchant plant. Luminant doesn't have a contract for that output. They are going to sell it into the ERCOT market just like the rest of their generation. And particularly why this is interesting is that Luminant is very much a traditional generator. They own coal plants, gas plants. They have no mandate to do solar in particular. There's no guarantee of a return. There's no rate base like a investor-owned utility who could get ratepayers to pay for those capacity additions. They take the risk themselves of adding on new capacity and selling the generation into the market. So they're doing so. As a part of their total portfolio, they thought that that was an economically good decision, and I would tend to agree. It's a new asset class and provides some things that other sources don't. So the fact that an entity like Luminant got into solar in a big way was another milestone for the industry in Texas and really in general for the solar industry in the country. Subsequent to that, Austin went out about a year ago with another RFP for additional amounts of solar. Their deal with Recurrent was so good, they wanted to get a little bit more. What's interesting here is that in response to that, they received about 1,300 megawatts of projects under the price that they got with Recurrent. So in 1 year's time, they got a lot more solar that became at least that cheap. So, it shows the continued cost declines of solar and how we're continuing to innovate there. They agreed to move forward on 3 projects that they got, totaling another 440 megawatts, several of those kind of under construction now and under development. So, the latest entity to put an RFP out there gets the best pricing, and so we're seeing a lot of that. And finally, on the retail side, another innovation that was exciting, TXU Energy, one of the retail providers that I mentioned before on the buyback program, recently entered into a partnership with SunPower, which is one of the large module manufacturers and power plant developers here in Texas, to offer TXU solar. And so they're partnering with SunPower on providing solar to their customers. And what's interesting here to me is that retail providers, utilities, and others have at times done other solar promotional things like bill stuffers. We'll put in a thing into your monthly bill that says, hey, if you're interested in solar, call these guys, whatever. In this case, TXU saw solar as valuable enough to partner with SunPower and really make it a part of their brand. It's TXU Solar, it's their offering, because they see that their customers are interested in solar and they want to have a hand in helping deliver that. So this is just getting off the ground, excited to see where it goes and what others do. The interesting thing here is really that solar being cost competitive opens up all sorts of interesting things, and the market players that are out there will discover ways to deliver that value to customers. In Texas, we're not going to have any one way. It's not going to be a top-down, state policy-driven, thou shalt do solar this way, this much. It's going to be solar is competitive and it works, and all the market participants and all the customers can come together in a way that captures that value in a way that works for them. So we're seeing that happen. So from all of that background, looking ahead over the next couple of years and where we're going, I think we're taking off commensurately with that economic value that we're ready to provide. So this is a map that shows what's online and what's in development here in Texas. So ERCOT, the grid operator, does interconnection studies that help determine what impact new electricity generation projects are going to have on the grid. They do that with everybody, and these are the projects that they're looking at with solar. What's interesting is that I mentioned what we have online right now, 560 megawatts. There are currently 7,400 megawatts of projects being developed, being investigated for development. More than 2,200 megawatts of those, or 2.2 gigawatts of projects, already have signed interconnection agreements, which means they're through that review process. They've been cleared by ERCOT to plug in whenever they're ready, because they've passed all the tests and done all the things that they need to do to move forward. It's a lot of new capacity that's under development and that we expect to come online, especially relative to where we are right now. And another interesting thing to me, both economically and just technically, it's not just in one place. Texas is a big state. We've got a lot of land, a lot of sun, and so you're seeing solar development happen commensurately in different places where you have good resource, you have good transmission access and other things. You have good land availability and landowners who are interested in getting involved in solar. So you're seeing in that kind of far west Texas region, Pecos County, Reeves County, Brewster County, some real heavy activity where you have truly the best solar resource and a lot of good land available. But it's not just in that little corridor. As far up as Deaf Smith and the Panhandle and as far south as Webb County and other places, 20 different counties have projects online or in development. So solar is truly a statewide endeavor. This is just showing the big power plants. Certainly the population centers are Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin will have a ton of rooftop and kind of urban area solar development. But there's really kind of no place in Texas where we won't potentially have a good amount of solar development. So that's good to see. And finally, I'll close with this, and then I'll take questions looking at kind of where we think things are going. The previous map showing here, the development map, this is what's under development. This is what the industry is actually working on right now. But the reality is not every project comes to fruition. Some projects choose not to move forward for economic or other reasons. That's fine. And this is just what we're doing. ERCOT does their own analysis looking ahead. They do a study called the Long-Term System Assessment that tries to get at what do we think what generation and what load will be out there in Texas needing to be served so that we know where we need to be thinking about transmission access, both to serve load and the generation that exists. They do this just as a part of their kind of 15-year time horizon planning. And as a part of that, they look at what the current economics are of various generation sources, and so what do they think will get built based on economics to serve the load that will exist. And what is amazing to me in Texas here, what they have said is that by 2030, they expect 13,000 megawatts of solar to come online just under business as usual conditions. So with no new mandates at the federal level or the state level, no carbon prices or new environmental regulations, and no massive macroeconomic changes like population growth or natural gas getting mega expensive or super mega cheap forever, anything like that. Just, trends as they are, 13,000 megawatts, 13 gigawatts of solar online by 2030, again compared to 560 that we have online right now. So, this is an independent entity in ERCOT looking at the development of the market, not the solar industry trying to say, here's all this stuff we're doing. This is ERCOT saying, this is what we're planning on just based on the economics. So it's an exciting development. We agree that there is a tremendous potential for Texas. Again, a lot of land, a lot of sun, a lot of electricity load, and it makes sense for us to grow as a part of the portfolio from that less than 1% to an appreciable amount. And this 13,000 megawatts in 2030 would equal about 7% of the portfolio. So very much a reasonable step, a reasonable addition given our economics, and I think something that will work hand in hand with natural gas, coal, nuclear, and wind to provide a good balanced portfolio. So that I think was that was my last one. So happy to answer questions on any of the things that I covered or anything that folks are interested in.
Hey, Charlie. This is John. I've got a question that was sent directly to me, and I'll read it out for you.
Great.
This was from Michael Martin. He asked,
Great.
how do you expect Texas commercial real estate owners will view solar as value-adding assets to larger facilities?
That's a good question. To some extent, we'll see. I don't know if I have a super particular insight. I think that commercial building owners are, have been looking for a number of years at energy performance as a component of what their offer is, and so lighting and windows and air conditioning and just good energy performance of a building. And now solar enters that mix of what characterizes the energy performance of that building. And now that we're cost competitive, I think it makes sense that commercial building owners, tenants and others will start to look at solar as an option for their sites. So I would expect more integration to happen and that to be a value add. One of the, on the policy front, one of the things that will be interesting to see, PACE is a new model that's developed, property assessed clean energy. So the state of Texas has enabled a new financing mechanism wherein commercial buildings can access financing that is then paid back through property taxes to do energy upgrades on their buildings, solar being an eligible piece of that. And so There's been a lot of interest in doing energy efficiency upgrades with that sort of financing. Individual territories in Texas at the county level are starting those programs. Travis County now has one. The city of Houston has moved forward. Dallas has approved that. And so I think there's going to be a lot of commercial energy efficiency activity, and I think solar could get pulled into that as an addition to make those projects be even bigger and better. Any other questions?
Great. It looks like we've also got a question. There's one from Andrew Martin. Do you see it in the chat window, Charlie?
Oh, there we go. I was not on the right thing. Why don't you read me Andrew's?
Sure. It says, Charlie, do you have an idea of the proportion of future solar, residential versus commercial, and versus utility scale?
I don't have set projections. Right now, the breakdown is about 400 utility, 85 residential, and about 70 commercial. Historically in the solar industry, those have moved variably. Different segments get moved quicker or slower depending on a whole lot of market things. So it's kind of hard to say that there will be one particular outcome. Certainly we've got millions and millions of people, and I mentioned the 270 square miles of rooftop space, so I think that will be big. But we also have a giant amount of land and a good system in ERCOT for doing large-scale project development. So I think by capacity, I would expect that utility-scale projects will be the biggest piece for some time, but the others will move fast as well.
Okay, it looks like we've got one from James Ornstein. James asks, any comments on the future of the REC markets in Texas, especially for municipal utilities like DME, who seem to be disavowing RECs in favor of quick start gas generators?
Honestly, I don't think RECs are going to be a huge driver for solar. All of that here in solar in Texas would be voluntary RECs, or renewable energy credits, that are the certificate that you receive for generating a megawatt hour of renewable energy. Without a mandated retirement of RECs, which is what renewable portfolio standards offer you, the value of those voluntary RECs tends to be much lower. And because we just have a tremendous amount of wind here in Texas, the nationally leading wind, I did the math for last month. There's, I think, 85 times more wind on the system than solar. There's just a lot of surplus RECs out there, so I don't know if REC values are going to drive a lot of new capacity.
Okay, we've got another question. This one is there any idea whether Encore will continue their incentive in 2017? Sorry if I'm saying that incorrectly. ONCOR.
Nope, that's right. Encore. I can't say I have any particular intel. They've had an incentive program for a number of years. It's been very helpful in the Dallas area. I know they kind of make continual program changes to that. The utilities, Encore and CenterPoint, AEP, and others are required to have an energy efficiency program where they spend a certain number of dollars, and solar is a component of those programs. So each utility kind of has a choice as to what they how they want to invest their required, those required dollars in various technology approaches. So I think that solar will continue to be a valuable piece of those puzzles. Energy efficiency has had a long run, and I know that a lot of the low-hanging fruit has been taken, and so and efficiency upgrades can kind of get more expensive over time as you get deeper and deeper into improving energy performance, whereas solar is thankfully trending in the other way. It's getting more and more cheap, and we haven't deployed a whole lot of it yet on residential and commercial buildings. So I think solar for Encore and others really does represent a big opportunity. But it's hard to say how they'll choose to make those decisions internally. I would hopefully they don't do anything drastic and shut things down. We always like to see kind of consistency and smooth transitions in any market.
Okay, great. If anyone has any other questions now, Charlie, one question that some folks have had is if you're okay with us sharing the slides, or as a PDF or something along those lines.
Sure. Yeah, I'll send you a PDF of the deck, and you can send it out to individual folks or put it on your site.
Great. Yeah, I'll probably put it up alongside the archival link of your talk, and give people that option as well.
Yeah.
For those of you who have included an email, though, I'll send a copy of the PDF out. Are there any other questions?
No one's going to ask me about storage. Everyone always asks about storage.
Do you have any thoughts on storage you'd like to share?
Not huge. It's, I'm kind of joking, but storage is another technology development that's really grown quickly in the past couple of years and is interesting for a lot of reasons. The thing for me is that it's not inherently tied to solar per se. People ask, does solar need storage in order to grow? And the answer is clearly no. We're less than 1% of the total usage. Anytime that we're generating solar electricity, customers need it. I showed that peak chart earlier about all that demand from the residential side in those hot summer days. So there's no need to kind of store the solar for later. And at the end of the day, storage stores electricity. It doesn't store solar. So the development of storage will really empower all sorts of interesting grid applications and grid opportunities, some of which will have relevance to solar and others won't. But we'll see how it goes. Solar companies are certainly watching it and interested in the value that it might provide to their projects, but a lot of other folks are as well.
Hey Charlie, what is your email address, if I can have?
It's on the last page of the slides there, so I'll send it around and you'll have it there.
Okay, thank you.
Charlie, it looks like two other questions came in. This one from Pam. She asks, are any of the solar farms being built near wind farms to take advantage of existing transmission?
It's a good question. There's some general. I think looking at those areas, I think it's the latter part of the question. The solar plants are certainly sited near existing transmission, more so than existing generation, and so that's certainly a consideration as you're looking at land in West Texas or really anywhere, making sure that you have the ability to interconnect to the grid, and so that's something. Thankfully, wind and solar balance each other out pretty well. The West Texas wind tends to blow at night, and solar obviously shines during the day. So we're finding that solar and wind can utilize similar transmission infrastructure, so that we fill up those lines and the capacity on those lines more efficiently, more effectively than either one could do alone. And certainly, gas plants and coal plants and everyone else uses those lines as well. So it's not unique to wind or solar, but I think adding solar to the capacity that we have out there is a benefit to utilizing them more completely.
Okay, and we've got one last question, and then we'll wrap things up. This one's from Kurt, and he asks, at what level?
I wouldn't say that there is any particular number. I think that, again, storage will provide opportunities as it becomes cost effective that supplement solar, but that supplement all sorts of other electricity uses. Certainly as solar penetration gets higher, the grid operators will need to make sure that they can maintain the reliability of the overall system. Thankfully, in this area, wind has kind of paved the way. ERCOT already manages the 16,000 megawatts of wind on the system, again compared to the 500 that we have in solar. So we're already very, very good at managing those variable resources in ERCOT in particular. And again, because solar, I think, balances the wind, solar during the day, wind at night, they'll be able to use some of those lessons learned. And I don't see it being a problem in any time. And really, the more solar that you add, the less variability you have when we're getting better with forecasting and things like that. So I don't think that there will be any one clear transition point in terms of penetration where you say, now we need storage. I think it's going to be innovation that happens concurrently, and we'll see how we go.
Okay, well, I think there was maybe one other question coming. I'm not sure if it's, nope, looks like it was a request for the slides. So just wanted to say thanks again, Charlie, for your excellent presentation, and to everyone for joining in. We have these talks every 2 weeks, and hopefully some of you who participated will join in the future. And again, thanks, Charlie, for your time.
Great, thank you. Have a great day.
Charlie, can I ask a question? Hello?
Looks like one more.
Yeah, quick question, please. Can I?
Sure, go ahead. One last one.
Hey, Charlie, can you tell me, do you know that, who are the most popular solar panel manufacturer used in the Texas region?
I don't popular. I would say the slide that I showed with our members, and if you go to our website, www.txsolarpower.org, we list our members on the site there. Several of our members are module manufacturers, and so they, I think, are the most active here in Texas, participating with us. So I'd check them out.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Cool.
Okay, thanks again, Charlie, and thanks for everyone for tuning in.
All right. Thank you all. Have a great day.